In ethical psychiatry, we must account for the role of evolution. Depression, fits of panic, sexual pathos, all responses to ancient selection pressure. The irony is that this theory is why Ryan's people invited me here. They mistake my study of natural law for the worship of competition. Remember, Eleanor, one must know the beast before it can be slain.
Bioshock 2 tends to be overlooked when compared to the other games in the trilogy. While it is a good game, it's not hard to see why it's less popular than the other two. In a lot of ways, it represents an awkward halfway point between Bioshock 1 and Bioshock Infinite. The second game does manage to stand out, however, thanks in part to its exceptional antagonist, Sophia Lamb. The first Bioshock was a masterpiece in world building despite few cutscenes and even fewer interactable NPCs. Our first trip to Rapture was novel, and every new audio diary helped to flesh out its tragic and brutal history. Then there's the big reveal, the "would you kindly" moment. On its own, it wasn't the most original twist ever, but the way it was handled in Bioshock is what sets it apart and solidifies it as a legendary moment in gaming. Bioshock played the free will twist so well because it spent the entire game making you feel powerful, making you feel like you had a choice in what you were doing. From picking the fate of the little sisters to editing your genes to create a highly customized build, you were made to feel powerful in the first half of Bioshock, only to have that feeling of freedom and power ripped away in a single scene. The developers leveraged the fact that you were playing a game to create a narrative twist that couldn't be replicated in a novel or a film. Would You Kindly is an example of video games transcending entertainment and becoming art. Simply put, Roger Ebert was wrong. This left Bioshock 2 with Big Daddy-sized shoes to fill. The developers had a choice to make. Either attempt to one-up the twist from the first game and risk falling flat, or not include a twist at all and risk seeming boring in comparison. In true Bioshock 2 fashion, they picked a middle ground. While the base game had no real shocking twist, the DLC Minerva's Den does have a big reveal at the end. It's actually quite good. It almost rivals the "would you kindly" twist. But Bioshock 2 did manage to improve some aspects over the first game. The combat was much faster paced and more streamlined thanks to quality of life changes such as having both your plasmid and your weapon out at once. Hacking was also made into a real-time event that no longer paused combat. This resulted in hectic situations like trying to remote hack a turret while running for cover or bashing in a splicer's face at the same time. More non-enemy NPCs were added as well, and this resulted in a bigger web of relationships between characters. The relationships between Eleanor Lamb, Sophia Lamb, and Subject Delta resulted in an emotional interplay that wasn't really possible in the first Bioshock, with its relative lack of meaningful characters. And so for a time, Bioshock 2 managed to stand out relative to the prequel. The gameplay was faster, more hectic, and there were more characters to flesh out the dying world of Rapture. But then Infinite came along and did all of those things better. Gone was any notion of a wrench lurker build in Bioshock Infinite. The game had firmly redefined itself as an action-oriented shooter. Whereas Bioshock 2 tweaked the combat of the first game, Infinite completely overhauled it. Infinite was also much more driven by inter-character relationships, and it did this in a more impactful way than the second game had. And so Bioshock 2 is left as an awkward middle child, sandwiched between two games that arguably did everything better than it did. In a way, Bioshock 2 can be seen as the cocoon and the metamorphosis between the first game and the third. Which is a shame, because it's a great game in its own right, and a big reason for that is that it features Rapture's most terrifying villain, social psychologist Sophia Lamb. Dr. Lamb is a more compelling antagonist than Andrew Ryan and even Frank Fontaine because she combines the worst aspects of both men while having a much more sinister and far-reaching goal. Sophia Lamb has a lot in common with Andrew Ryan, which seems like an odd statement considering that their beliefs are essentially polar opposites. It's not the content of their beliefs that make them similar, it's the degree in which they believe.
Rapture is a paradise of the ego, Eleanor. Under Ryan, the voices of an entire city sing the virtues of greed and pride. But truth, rather, is in the body. Already they grow weary of struggling against one another in fruitless competition. Observe the bent backs, the drawn faces. Ryan promised us more, they seem to say. In what shall we now believe? And Eleanor, it is our task to answer.
Both are ideological zealots, and both view Rapture as the proving grounds for their respective ideologies. The rigidity of their beliefs makes them impossible to reason with and dangerous because of it. While the similarities are more subtle, Sophia Lamb also reflects the worst qualities of Frank Fontaine. Unlike his contemporaries, Fontaine has no clear or strongly held ideological beliefs. He appears to be motivated by pure greed and self-interest, the embodiment of what Lamb calls the tyrant. He is a narcissistic sociopath who only cares about himself, and appears to have no limit to the suffering that he's willing to impose on others in order to get what he wants. And this complete disregard for the welfare of others, at least on the individual level, is a trait that Lamb shares with Fontaine.
To my daughter, Eleanor, soon you will be born, and Rapture will be your home. You shall be raised as I was, to advance the common good through social psychiatry. This city's potential is immeasurable, Eleanor, yet our beliefs are unwelcome here. Life will be difficult, but the price of revolution is always dear. If we are patient with her, Rapture will come to us.
This can be seen most clearly in her relationship with her own daughter, Eleanor. Dr. Lamb views Eleanor as a tool, a means to an end. When Sophia learned about Jack, the protagonist in the first game, she wasn't horrified by the erasure of his will, she was rather inspired by it. She saw the conditioning forced upon him as a good thing, as something that could be used to create model, selfless citizens with no ego or concern for themselves.
This calls everything into question. Even as I record this, I can scarcely believe. Psychiatry has been my continual study to chart consciousness in all its strata. But intelligence does not require introspection. The son of Ryan was more effective than all his self-aware rivals. He lived without questions. I could end the self and save the world.
Her initial experiment to create this so-called utopian was Gil Alexander, one of Rapture's lead scientists. The experiment ended in failure, leaving Gil Alexander deformed and insane. Rather than call the experiment off, she doubled down, preparing to subject Eleanor to the same procedure. Dr. Lamb was callously willing to sacrifice her only daughter in order to achieve her vision. Her Fontaine-like willingness to exploit others extended well beyond her own flesh and blood. One of Lamb's early tactics was to provide for the poor and orphaned of Rapture. While outwardly this was a compassionate gesture, she was doing it to further her following among the citizenry. The brilliance of this wasn't lost on Frank Fontaine, and this makes her one of the only characters you ever hear him praise. Lamb is so manipulative that she managed to inspire the main villain of the first game.
This Lamb twist went after Ryan all cockeyed. Solidarity angle was smart at first. Poor houses and bread lines, high-grade bunco. And that religious rights debate? Gotta wonder if she staged it just to watch Ryan squirm up there in his monkey suit. Lamb's only problem is she really buys into the whole song and dance. Saving the world? Ha! Rapture just ain't her town. Ryan's got her on ice somewhere now. And I figured that opens up the charity scam for the professionals.
Dr. Lamb's introduction as a villain is also much more immediate and more compelling than either Ryan or Fontaine. Whereas Andrew Ryan spends most of the game as a face on a screen or the voice coming through Rapture's loudspeaker, Lamb is established as the villain in the very first cutscene. You meet her face to face and are promptly forced to shoot yourself. Your rivalry with Fontaine is similar in the sense that the stakes are more personal. However, you don't really find out about him until the game is almost over. By the time you recognize that Fontaine is the true villain of the game, you've already gotten through most of it. But the one thing, more than anything, that sets Dr. Lamb apart is the scope of her ambitions. Andrew Ryan was inspired to flee the surface world when he saw the devastation caused by atomic weaponry.
This facility belongs to the city now, to Ryan Industries, at least until the rioting subsides. While it is unfortunate that such measures had to be taken, I must admit, it is gratifying to see this building condemned. Fontaine is gone, Lamb is gone, or close enough. I am alone at last, alone with my city.
Frank Fontaine loved Rapture because it proved ample opportunities for him to con and manipulate his way to the top. Both of the first game's antagonists' ambitions were tied into Rapture. Sophia Lamb's ambitions, however, were global.
I know the surface, Eleanor. I spent half a lifetime there, in service of the common good. But then, I heard my own words twisted by fat old men squatting over the embers of Hiroshima. Were the modern world a patient in my care, I would diagnose it suicidal. On perhaps that point alone, Andrew Ryan is correct. Rapture is deliverance.
This somewhat subtle detail is what truly sets Lamb apart from the first game's villains. No longer is it a fight for control of Rapture. In Bioshock 2, you're fighting for the fate of the world. Dr. Lamb's plan to create utopian, selfless citizens with Eleanor as the initial sacrifice is only the beginning of her plans, the first step in a plot to change the entire world. There's a number of reasons Lamb is more frightening than either Ryan or Fontaine, but the scope of her vision is what truly sets her apart, and this is why her Ryan-like idealism, combined with her Fontainian disregard for the rights of others, makes her Rapture's greatest villain.